speaking of that, Coach Bryant and Joe really didn't know each other very well. I mean, they respected each other because of the record and so forth. And the gentleman who was athletic director up at the time was a fellow named Jim Tarman, and after we'd agreed to play, he called me one day and he said, we need to get Coach and Mrs. Bryant and Joe, and I forget his wife's name, but get them together when they first get down there so they can sit down. And said they've never done anything like that socially. They've seen each other at conventions. So I said, okay. I said, what do you want me to do? He said, well, you ask Coach Bryant if he would agree to have he and Mary Harmon have dinner with Joe and Pat, let's say. So I went and talked to him about it, and he said, well, I said, what for? Kind of, he just wasn't real big on that kind of stuff. And I said, well, Joe would like to get to know you, brother. I didn't tell him when Joe hadn't called, but he said, oh, Joe wants to do that. He said, okay, we'll do that. And so I called Jim Turner back, told him, and he said, well, I told Joe that Coach Bryant had called and wanted Joe. He said, this works out perfect. So anyway, Coach Bryant called and he said, you run us over to Le Pavillon Hotel in New Orleans where Joe, the Penn State was staying. He said, we'll get a cab back. So I said, okay. So I took him over there and dropped him off. And next day I saw Coach Bryant. And I said, well, how'd it go last night? He said, oh, great. He said, Joe's the greatest guy. I said, his wife. And they just, they had never gotten together socially and sat down and talked about things. He said, we had so many friends in common and experiences in coaching. And he said, really enjoyed this. I don't know when we've had a better evening.
Really? And never really met each other than